We are back for round 3 of Inside the Mind of an Adulterer. So, a very popular series we started a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to wrap things up today and just dive into a couple of more questions. So, hope that you'll stay tuned. Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Redeemed Marriage Podcast. This is Rusty and Heather Bryant, and we're back with the third installment of Inside the Mind of an Adulterer. So we started this series a couple of weeks ago, and what a huge response we've had. And so I started thinking, I was like, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing 3 of these. But then I was like, well, people are listening, so I guess they want to hear it.
Yeah.
So,
and in the first 10 minutes of the first one, because we thought we would do it in one.
yeah.
Like we weren't planning for this to be
And
2,
here we are
much less
an hour and a
30.
half
Yeah.
later.
That's right.
It's going to be.
That's right. That's right. But it is a very, very popular topic.
Yep. So I think some people have gained some really good insight and a lot of stuff that can apply to you, whether you have been through this or, there's a lot of, we've talked about boundaries. We've talked about just, the feelings and flirting and all kinds of stuff. So I think that, this is good for all of our listeners to, dive into a little bit. So I'm actually looking forward to next week because I guess we're going to flip the script a little bit and I'm going to sit on the witness stand.
Yeah.
And we'll see what you have to ask me about how things were going. And of course, we're talking about 12 years ago, the marriage crisis that we endured and went through when Heather confessed to being unfaithful. And so we've been just asking some questions. I've had an opportunity just to ask some real raw and hard questions that Heather has been able to kind of look back and dig deep and answer some questions so that we can just kind of get a better understanding of what was going on in her mind during a pretty dark season of life. But, of course, as the name of our podcast, The Redeemed Marriage, we are not there anymore. So that is our message of hope. So you ready to jump in?
I am. And I know it's hard for people to believe that I don't know what these questions are, but I really don't.
Well, you glanced at them the first week.
That's right. Yeah. You're
but
right.
then we haven't talked about them.
And I do that kind of on purpose. I think that I feel like I overthink things.
Yeah, sure.
If I go, now what are you going to ask, and kind of try to come up with the perfect answer, and I just want to share just genuinely from my heart.
Yeah.
And I do better at that when it's
and to be honest, the questions that I had written down, your answers have led me to ask other questions.
I gotcha.
So they've just kind of helped me to.
Hey, you didn't wish our listeners Happy Mother's Day. Shame on you.
Well, that's because they're not going to be listening to it on Mother's Day.
Oh, that's true.
But today is
true.
Mother's Day.
That's true.
So happy Mother's Day to you.
Or belated.
Happy Mother's Day to you.
Thanks,
and
baby.
to all of our listeners that are mothers. All right, so let's jump in. And here's what we're going to do. I do have a couple of questions. I feel like some of these we might have touched on a little bit, but I don't know that we did. And so I want to make sure that we get into a little bit of depth of these,
okay.
but then also there are certainly some new ones. But the first one, there's actually a couple of them that kind of go together here at the beginning. And I know we did kind of touch on it, but I just want to, if I ask it in this way, if you'll be able to answer it maybe a little more specifically. So one of the reasons why we did this topic is because people out there, I think, and I said this on the first episode of this series, people out there just sort of think, how could somebody do this?
Mm-hmm.
And they ask the question, how could somebody do this to their husband and their kids? And so I want to know, did you ever consciously think that what you were doing was more important than your family? Like, did you ever were you able to compartmentalize it in such a way where you were saying, I know that what I'm doing could ruin my family, so what I'm doing is more important than my family?
I'm going to answer honestly. No, I did not. Okay, so what I've been able to tell on looking back is, I said to you, I think it was last week, I said, and this was very real and raw, that I even had to go back and apologize to somebody for judging them before I had gotten into that situation myself. Like, I judged people. Like, I was the person that said, how could they do that to their family? Mm-hmm. Okay, so how did I go from that to being in the throes of it to now looking back and being disgusted by it and thinking, how did I get there? Mm-hmm. Like, those are 3 totally different spots to be in. And all I can compare it to is, or all I can say about that season is that nothing, like, I didn't think logically about anything. Everything was just kind of swirly in my head. I think that I was so trying to live in keeping things covered up and keeping things secret that I honestly didn't even look at it in a way that I was like, oh, this is really happening. It was almost like this make-believe life that I was living, this alternative. Mm-hmm. Is that the word?
I don't know.
Other life that I was
your
living.
Alter ego.
Yeah, like I never remember thinking, oh my gosh, if this gets found out, I'm going to be in so much trouble. Like, it was almost a cockiness of nobody's ever going to find this out. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm doing such a great, and that was, of course, looking back, it was such a lie of the enemy saying, you're good. Mm-hmm. Like, you got this. You're doing a great job covering up. Nobody suspects anything. This is fine. It's fine. And so I think that would have been a wake-up call to me if I would have thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing? This is not more important than my family. But it never came to my mind. I was such in a mode of survival and such in a mode of cover-up and secrecy that those things just didn't come to my head.
Well, kind of a follow-up on what you just said. You answered this a little bit, but I want to ask it in a little bit more specific way. So, we've gone back and we've talked about leading up to the actual, crossing the line. Mm-hmm. And so I'm speaking here more of when you were in the midst of actually having an affair, emotional, physical affair. And when that was going on, there had to have been some times that things were premeditated. Mm-hmm. And when those times were premeditated, did you ever think, what am I doing? Like, as you had made the decision that you were going somewhere you shouldn't be, did you ever think, what am I doing? Or were you just so caught up that it didn't matter?
I think that I was just so caught up in things that it just didn't matter. I can remember a couple of times I was like, a couple of things happened where I thought I might get caught. And in those moments, I was like, what are you doing? Like, what is happening? I can remember a specific moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm fixing to get called out. And in that moment, it was like a truth dagger came in. And it was like, what are you doing? Like, you're risking everything. Mm-hmm. But then when that blew by and I didn't get caught, then it was very quickly back into, you've got everything under control. Mm. It's fine. Like, everything is fine. See, you didn't get busted. You're fine. You're doing a great job covering everything up. You're never going to be caught. This is going to be fun. It'll end, and then everything's going to go back to normal.
Okay. Good answer.
Is that hard?
Is that hard?
I mean, like, did you think I would answer differently?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. Yep. I'm just curious. I mean, because I think what we're trying to discover here is that there's not a lot of rational thinking.
Not.
And where from the other person's side of it, we try to make sense of it.
Right.
And, and I think that there are people out there that are maybe going through it, and they're trying to make sense of what their spouse has done, and they can't really believe the answers that they're getting. Like, they're like, no, you had to, you knew what you, and I'm not saying you didn't know what you were doing. It's just, you're being honest and telling us that this is the way you were feeling. I believe that you would be completely honest if you were just like, no, I knew exactly. It's just an irrational thought process.
Right.
And I think that that's where the enemy just clouds every decision and thought and, future. It's just...
Right. And then one lie builds on top of another lie, on top of another, until you can't even remember what the truth is. It's just lie after lie after lie, and story after story after story. And then, like you said, it's cloudy. Like I was on an airplane not too long ago, and I remember getting above the clouds and not being able to see anything down below. And that's kind of what it felt like. All I could see was just a mess. And it was like, I can't even see what reality needs to be anymore. And the only checks were when I felt like I might get caught. And for some reason that, it opened my eyes to truth real quick. And it was like, what am I doing? And I got scared, and, and then when it didn't happen, I just lulled. It's like the enemy was just, shh, 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 lulled back into, you're okay, you're fine, this is going just like you want it to, and then I would kind of get that awoken feeling again when I got scared, or when I thought that I might get caught, and then it was shh, 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 caught, just the enemy trying to keep me where I was, so that no breakthrough would come, and that there wouldn't be any steps towards restoration. As long as he could keep me living in a lie and in destruction, and I allowed myself to be in that spot, then there was no danger of me coming out of it.
When people are living in sin and committing sin and even habitual sin, there's often the hangover of guilt after something happens. Especially when it's something that somebody is claiming that they're not going to do ever. I'm stopping. I'm not going to do this again. And then it happens. And then, that happens with addiction, obviously, and other things. And I'm just curious, was there this level of guilt that you lived with, and was it different at the beginning and during and towards the end? Do you see was there different levels of that, or how did that all kind of go about in your mind?
Absolutely. I think after the first moment of knowing that I'd crossed a line and that I'd done something inappropriate for someone who was married to do, there was an initial guilt, but then you kind of justify it. And I quickly did that, justified it and saying, oh, but it wasn't that bad, but that was just the initial. And then you kind of talk yourself out of it being as bad as you think it is. But then, as crazy as this sounds, the only way I know how to explain it is this: guilt did not set in until it was known. As long as nobody knew, then there wasn't any guilt that I felt, because I had not hurt anybody that they knew of. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it was just like I kept going. And again, I had that initial, what am I doing? And then that's when I kind of got lulled into telling myself it was okay and that nobody was ever going to find out. And when that happened, there was no guilt through it until I was known. And then when everything was fully known, that's when I literally couldn't breathe because the guilt was so heavy.
Do you think that, I'm just trying, man, I don't know that we've ever really talked that that deep about that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think about people that are out there that may be living in some sin that may or may not be this. And there is this guilt. And do you think that some of that, and it's, nobody knows that they're doing it.
Sure.
And
Silent
so,
sin.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, it's kind of like you, but where you were not feeling any guilt, I wonder if it's because, did you ever even talk to God about what was going? You know, because I think that there's people out there that they're dealing with this sin and they're trying, you know, they're feeling a conviction. They're telling God, I got to stop this, you know, help me. And then it happens again. And there's just this overwhelming guilt because they've let God down. But I mean, you were in such a place where what I'm feeling like you're saying is you were in such a place that you didn't even feel like you were letting God down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. I think that if somebody is living in sin and they're feeling that guilt of, that's 100% the Holy Spirit and it's a check in your spirit. Like this is not what God has for you. You were created for more than this, you know, all of those things. And I think that is, a good thing that you can even hear.
Yeah.
And so don't be discouraged by, I failed again. Like he doesn't love you any less. He's still calling you and saying, you know, precious one, come to me. Like, let's get out of this. And the fact that you can hear that is great. Like I had just gotten so much, because head knowledge, I knew it was wrong. I mean, I'd grown up in church and I knew that adultery was wrong and I knew that what I was doing was a sin. And so if I didn't talk to God about it, then I didn't have to deal with it as much. And so it's kind of like, it's so much pride and so much I deserve this and I can justify this and this feels right. So there's so much pride in it that I think that I could have opened the Bible where it said don't commit adultery and just thought, except it's not talking to me. Like there was so much of that pride involved. Like surely he's not talking to me. Like surely he wants me to be happy, you know? And again, there's no, like I can hear somebody saying that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense because I was just so engulfed and in my sin that I just wasn't seeing clearly. And so, why would I talk to God about it? Because then there was a chance that I would have felt bad about it.
Yeah.
So just avoided that altogether.
I know when we deal with couples sometimes in marriage coaching and stuff, you know, we have one of the spouses that has been, you know, living in some sort of a sin. There's been some inappropriate, you know, actions, whatever it is, and they just really don't feel like they need to they don't feel any remorse for it, they're in and that helps me to understand it a little bit more because, you know, we've had that even recently happening with some couples that we've dealt with because they, you know, I just want to shake them and be like, you know, this is wrong, but I don't know that they're acknowledging that it's wrong, right? Because they're so far from God. Right. That's the missing piece in all this. Right. And so if there's something like what Heather said, that you have the head knowledge and biblical knowledge even, and people are telling you this is wrong, and then you don't feel like it's wrong, that's a massive red flag in your life. If someone godly is speaking godly wisdom to you, and you're not believing it, and you're saying, like Heather said, well, that doesn't really apply to me, or you don't even really feel anything or feel any guilt, then, yeah, that's because your heart is so hard.
It's so hard.
And you are not allowing the Holy Spirit to get a whisper in.
That's right. That's right.
So,
That's right.
I mean, I just, that's good. That's good to know, because I do feel like so many people that we talk to, they're in that spot. Maybe it's not as extreme as what's going on, but, you know, if you know something's wrong in your head, but you don't feel any guilt over it, then you're in a place that you're not even allowing the Holy Spirit to give you a check.
That's right. That's right. And at that point, you have to look at your relationship with the Lord. Is it head knowledge, which I had a ton of, and are you missing the relationship, which I was?
Yeah.
I didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus. And so my relationship with him was not suffering because of what I was doing, because I didn't have one. It was more of just, I broke this law instead of I broke my Father's heart.
Yeah.
So...
Well, you talked about this a couple of times, where you've talked about living in the secret sin, and it just is so overwhelming to try to put the pieces and try to maneuver things and, you know, lie about this and hide this and, you know, maybe delete this or whatever. Just real quick, what is it like to just juggle all of that and live in that, live that way for a period of time?
Sure. Well, I would love to just say it was all heavy and bad. But do you remember when we went into, I think it was the first counselor we went to, and he said that having an affair hits the same, I can't remember.
Part. Yeah, it affects the same part of your brain as like a drug, like cocaine.
Right, where you get like a high and you don't think anything can touch you. And I think that was part of it, just the excitement of how are we going to communicate, deleting this, making sure this is in the right place, lying to say I'm going here and I'm going there. It was, like a buzz, but then just also the heaviness of, and the fear of getting caught too. There were times where I was like, I'm never going to get caught. And then, like I said earlier today, that there were times where I was like, oh shoot, this is fixing to blow up, And so it was the excitement of, which sounds really bizarre, but if it wasn't exciting, and then I wouldn't have continued doing it. Does that make sense? And so it was a just kind of a high of making sure all the pieces were in the right place. But yet, when I would lay my head on the pillow at night, there was some like fear, I guess, of what I just described, of what if all that I'm doing does get found out, but just as quickly as I would allow that question in, I would, nobody's going to know. So I'd quickly talk myself out of it as well.
All right. Last question. We're going to fast forward a little bit and just try to get into your head a little bit of the moments when everything was found out and you had to confess. And when that happened, what was it like to go through getting caught, having to confess, and just your whole mentality, even from the days after that?
I think for me, in talking about all of this the last 3 weeks, probably this section is probably the hardest to talk about, because that is when I realized how many people I had hurt, and not only that, but how things could have played out differently had you responded differently. So looking back on those really it was a week, looking back on that week is by far the hardest for me to look back on. When I confessed to you, I was still very much in a fog of, I didn't know if I wanted to stay married to you. I was in a lie of, Maybe life was better somewhere else. Maybe life would have been different with somebody else. And so when I confessed to you, I was just, dang it, I got caught. It was just and I've said this before, it was very much a worldly sorrow. Like, people are going to know, people are going to find out, this is fixing to be very public. We knew it was going to be public because of the circumstances. And so that was just really, really embarrassing. Really embarrassing. Now, a lot of the couples that we talk with, it's not public. And so they miss that factor of just being, embarrassed and having people looking at you to see how you're going to handle it, to see how you're going to respond. So there was a lot of pressure from the outside world looking in. And of course, we both had unbelievable parental support. Like, our parents were like, we're here and we will do whatever needs to be done to help y'all through this. You even said my dad, it was just, telling him, besides telling you, and really in that moment, telling him was harder because, telling my dad was just, and then my mom later was probably the hardest in that moment.
Well, because you were in a state where what you were doing was hurting and destroying me, and you didn't really care.
Right.
So you didn't care that I was being hurt by your confession.
That's right.
But all of a sudden, you were having to hurt people.
Right.
You didn't want to hurt.
That's right. That's right. And so telling them was exceedingly hard. And then, as things came out over the next few days and became very, very public, it was more of just of a deep embarrassment because I knew people were judging me. And the mask that I had worn, not just for 3 months during the affair, but the mask that I had worn for so long on that our life was just perfect and I wanted people to know that or think that, it was just ripped off for everyone to see. And so then here I am, just a mess, and people knew that. So that part was exceedingly hard. Just a level of humiliation that I never dreamed was possible. Did not want to be in public anywhere. Every time, we would go out, I just felt like eyes were on me. And I'm going to tell you, even if it wasn't public knowledge, I know without a doubt that people feel that way. When it's like, you think people are looking at you and they don't even know, that's just part of it. But yeah, that was the hardest, season. But then, even more than that, a week later, when I was broken, and I don't know that I've talked about it on this, but I know that I've talked about, in this little 3-part series, but I know I've talked about godly sorrow before. And if you or someone you love is walking through this, and they are not broken, you need to hit your knees and pray for brokenness for them or for yourself. If you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I've never gotten there. I've never been broken. I never have been able to see what I did was wrong. It was a sin against God. It was a sin against my husband. It's a sin against my family. It's a sin against my church family. If you're thinking that, or it's wrong and you really don't care, what you want is more important, you need to pray for brokenness. And only God can do that. There is not a person in this world. Now, God can use people, of course, but there is not a person in this world that can say the right thing or do the right thing for you to break and for you to be able to see through the cloudiness of everything that you've been living in that lie. Because when God broke my heart for what I was doing, it was like excuse me, it was like he took off a pair of glasses that I had been wearing for so long and put on a brand new lens. And for me to be able to see clearly the pain that I had caused, the sin that I had committed, for me to see who I was without him was just a powerful, powerful thing in my life. And then all of a sudden I could see clearly. And then you're talking about what have I done hit for the very first time. It was like, what have I done? And it shifted from, oh my gosh, I got caught, to let me take ownership of everything that I did. And now I'm going to work my tail off and try to fix it. I'm going to try to become who my boys deserved. I wanted to become a godly woman that you deserved. And to be able to shift, it was literally like two different people. And I don't know how else to explain it than that. And I know that sounds bizarre, and I know it may sound extreme, but it was like, it was physically, which is why I wanted to get baptized again right after that, because it was physically like, what they say when you're baptized, that you're buried and then you raise with newness of life. And it was just I wanted my next steps to be steps that were towards God and were completely away from everything that I had just done. It's a 180 turn. It's not let me turn a little bit and then just keep looking back. It is I am turning away from everything that I have done, and I'm walking towards the Lord, and I'm walking with the Lord. And it has to be that extreme. It has to be what I've done is left behind, and I'm walking in newness of life. It has to be.
Well, there's not much else to say after that. But as you were talking, the things that kept coming to my mind were that there's people out there listening that are that may be involved in something like we were involved in, or it could be something else that they are in the midst of this. Like you said, the adrenaline rush and the excitement of hiding things and not feeling guilt really because of it. It's just, you're moving these pieces, and they may even be thinking, well, gosh, I don't want to get to a point where all of a sudden I feel terrible and feel guilty about it. And I think you painted this beautiful picture, though, that it's not that you went from this excitement of, oh, I'm living in sin and, it's me, to then all of a sudden a crushing, now I got to change my lifestyle.
Right.
I mean, I do think that there's people out there that are like, well, I don't want to follow Jesus because I don't want to change my lifestyle. But nobody, what you've just described, though, is the new life.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can compare to that.
Nope.
And the freedom that you live in now, the redemption, just completely washed clean of all of that. And then to see the marriage that we've created, the family, our children, we're just blessed, and there's no other way that could have happened without you being broken.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people get stuck because, yes, it's happened, their spouse finds out, and then, hey, let's just push it aside and move forward. But it's the life change. And when the life changes and it happens like you said, when you just start chasing after Jesus, then all of a sudden you're changing other people. There are generations of people that are being affected because of your life change. And it's powerful. So, all right, we're going to wrap up. That was good stuff, and that'll preach every single day. So, hey, thanks for listening. Come back next week. We're going to get into my head. There's probably a lot there, but let's see what happens.
Are we going to keep it to 1 week?
Who knows? It might. It might be 10 minutes. This one was 35 minutes. So, hey, thanks for staying with us the whole time, and we'll see you guys next week.